Welcome, everybody, to Journey to Independence. We have a really exciting event today. So, today we're diving into a much requested topic with the amazing Katie Sullivan. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce Katie properly with a brief bio. So, Katie Sullivan is the founder of Parenting Doula, an early parenting and sleeping consulting business. She's a Montessorian and a mother of two. Over the nearly 20 years she's studied and worked with young children, both in and out of the classroom, she earned a master's degree in early childhood education, an AMS primary credential, and a postpartum doula certification. So, welcome, Katie. And I'm just going to pin you so everybody can see.
Thank
Welcome, Katie.
thank you so much for the introduction. I'm honored to be here and excited to talk about floor beds. I think all parents should have access to information about floor beds and sleep from birth. It's a huge, huge topic that is not nearly as accessible as it should be. So I first started being interested in floor beds when I was pregnant with my first, who's now 4, and I did not have a lot of resources on the topic. So I used material from Maria Montessori and from Montessori from the Start, Lillard's book, and just kind of gave it a try. And
I love the cats trying to be in the
oh yeah,
conversation.
she's always close by.
Of course. So tell us a little bit more about your journey and then how did you then get into doing this on a professional level?
So I just loved the floor bed. I found it was really helpful when my daughter was little. It was helpful. I could put her to sleep and then I didn't have to transfer, from my arms to the bed. I could easily nurse when she was still eating at night. And then there's no transition from the floor bed to a bed because she's already in the bed. So as she got older, she's in the same bed. It's just got a little bit higher. There are so many reasons I love it, and I ended up doing it the same thing for my second child. I think everybody should have information about floor beds, whether or not it's right for your family is really for you to decide, but I think it's, a topic that not enough people know about. Yeah, so that's why we're
Absolutely.
here today.
Yeah, awesome. We were just talking about that, how there is such a lack of information when it comes to sleeping and especially when it comes to the floor bed. So, can you tell us so for people who don't know what a Montessori floor bed is, can you explain to us what it is and why Maria Montessori recommended them to start with?
Absolutely. So a floor bed is basically a bed on the floor. It's just a mattress on the floor or a mattress with a frame that's on the floor. And Maria Montessori recommended them for a couple of reasons. The main reason that Dr. Montessori liked the floor bed is because she really disliked the crib. She really thought children were, she said, being made to sleep. I mean, I don't think you can actually make a child sleep, but clearly children are being made to stay in the crib when they were ready to get up, or they weren't being allowed in the crib when they were ready to sleep. So that kind of gives the child more autonomy. And she thought that children should be able to sleep when they were tired and get up when they were ready so that they could kind of regulate their own sleep. And another big reason is she actually didn't speak a whole lot about floor beds, but a big component of Montessori theory is the concept of giving children independence. And Montessori really observed that when children have independence and when they're being taught age appropriate skills, they're a lot happier and calmer. And it really supports their building of self esteem. So, these are all support the floor bed, is that it really supports the independence and it supports children being able to get in and out themselves and regulate their own sleep a little bit.
Great. And when can we start using a floor bed? Is it based on age or is it based on development? This is a really big question. So just generally, and then we'll go into the finer details.
So, traditionally, a floor bed was recommended instead of a crib. So at birth, a baby would be in a bassinet or Moses basket, basically a small baby size bed. And then as they grew out of it, they'd move to a mattress, typically twin size mattress. So that usually occurs around 3 or 4 months, which I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but it kind of coincides with a lot of developmental changes, and babies at that age start to roll and need more space and sleep better when they have a little more space. So it all works out really well to transition babies right around that 3 or 4 months from the bassinet to the mattress. Although I have heard some people have used it from birth or from 6 weeks. That is less common, but certainly possible.
When you're thinking about though transitioning from that bassinet to a floor bed, can you explain, like, so you said developmentally at around that 3 or 4 months, there's this stage of development that's going on. Can you explain to people that are listening, what does that look like? Or what are the signs or what are the things that people should observe in their babies that they would be able to do so that they might see that they're ready for that transition? Because obviously we'll go into safe sleep practices later on because every country has their own ideals on safe sleep and things like that. But as a parent or a caregiver, what advice would you give on what to look for when your baby is ready or showing those signs? What should they look out for?
So often parents call this the 4 month regression. You hear that a lot from parents like, oh, my baby, they've been sleeping 8 hours and all of a sudden they're up every hour. This is often when babies are sharing rooms with parents and there's a developmental shift to where they're becoming more social. They can see a lot further. They also are developing an awareness of their environment. So, if you're starting to see those things, if your baby is all of a sudden waking up a lot more after sleeping for a longer time, that can be a sign that they're ready for a bigger space or their own space.
We had a question from Gloria saying, is 3 to 4 months too early to do the transition? I've seen some recommendations that's 5 plus months. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think personally, I think 3 months is a great age to transition your baby because around 4 months during that, I don't like to call it a regression. It's more of a sleep maturation where babies also at that age, their sleep patterns start to resemble adult sleep patterns. And so if you transition them before that development happens, they start to have the awareness of the environment that develops when they're in their bed and their space. So, as the awareness develops, also the awareness of their environment develops. And it's a lot harder when they are used to a certain environment, when they develop that awareness and they're sleeping, say, in a crib or in with their parents, and then all of a sudden you move them to another bed. It's a lot more of a transition.
Right. And we're definitely going to get into that because I do see a few questions in the chat about older children and transitioning, but I will definitely get to those questions. So thanks, guys. Just pop them in there and we'll get to that. But I wanted to talk. So we've spoken about when's a great time to transition. The tricky question that we get a lot is, are floor beds safe? So can you discuss floor beds and using them safely?
Yeah, so there are two things that are really important when you're choosing a floor bed. One is safe sleep practices, evidence-based safe sleep practices, and the other is childproofing. So for safe sleep, you don't want any, if your child's a baby under 12 months, don't want any loose blankets or sheets. You don't want pillows or stuffed animals. You don't want anything loose in the bed. You just want a tight fitted sheet. And you always want to place them on their back when you lie them down. I think those are probably the two most important evidence-based safe sleep practices. And then for childproofing, I think one of the most important things that people don't always consider is making sure all furniture is attached to the wall. That is huge for me because you may not think of it when your baby is small and they're not mobile, but before you know it, they will be. And anything with drawers, they'll start to climb and pull, and they'll need to be attached to the wall. And then the second thing is cords. So cords should be secured to the wall or behind furniture. Those are my biggest things. I know a lot of parents are concerned about outlets. I mean, of course, cover your outlets, but outlets in and of themselves are not that dangerous unless your child like shoves a metal object in one. So yes, definitely cover the outlets, but the primary childproofing recommendations are secure your furniture and secure your cords.
I was going to say, and that includes cords for like blinds, a lot of curtains or blinds, people, just for everyone that's listening out there, those are things that go unnoticed sometimes. So that's also a big one too, not just electrical cords.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can get a little hook or something and put it high up and just wind up the cord. That's a good point. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say a lot of people mention, and it's mentioned in the chat as well, they're concerned about the baby rolling off the bed. This is not inherently dangerous. It's much more hazardous for them to fall from a crib than it is for them to fall from a floor bed because a floor bed generally is recommended 4 to 6 inches off the ground. And you generally put a thicker rug or something around the edge of the bed. So when they roll, some babies don't even wake up. They just roll off and they sleep on the floor. Some babies do wake up and then they're a little startled and they cry for a minute and they fall back asleep. It's not a hazard.
Okay, so let's look at some of the questions that have come through about older children. So Christine was saying, is trying to start at 14 months not recommended? We have co-slept, but we're looking to get him into his own room and to a floor bed.
So, yes, of course, you can transition your baby to their own room and their own bed at any age. There are different things to consider when you have a toddler. A toddler going to their own room will definitely take a bit more of a structured plan. I think ultimately it'll be more work upfront, but in the long run, your child will likely sleep better and you will likely sleep better as well.
So with a 14-month-old, Katie, what would you say? You mentioned that there should be like a structured routine and stuff. Can you explain to us what that would look like? Or if you do have an old, Flora was saying my baby's 2 years old, is it too late? No, it's not too late. At any age, it might be a bit more of a structure around it. Can you explain what that looks like?
Yeah, so anytime you're making a big change in your child's routine, I find it generally works best when you reconsider and you make a plan. And if the child is old enough, like 3 or 4, involve them in making the plan. And the other thing I always recommend to families is write down the plan. So in the middle of the night, when your baby's waking up and you're half asleep and you're trying to transfer them to their own bed. Of course, it's easier just to let them crawl in with you, but you're like, okay, no, we're gonna stick with the plan. So make a plan, write it down, stick with it, and really decide on your boundaries. And then some families like to do this more gradually. So maybe they start with putting the child to sleep in their room, but then letting them come in the night if they come in. Or some parents choose to sleep in the child's room on the bed for a while and then transition away from that. Other families like to just start from where they want to be. So they create that boundary from the start. And it can be a little bit hard to stick with it. But again, if you have a plan, it's written down and you're consistent, it's generally a pretty quick transition because children are very quick learners and very capable. And also, if they know we are trusting them, they tend to live up to that trust and they tend to live up to, the capabilities that we know they can have.
I think that's a really great point when you said, like, when you actually trust them and see them as capable and confident. I think a lot of the issues that come up when it comes to any kind of big transition, like sleeping in their own bed or transitioning to a floor bed, is that we don't believe that they can do it and we don't see them as being capable. So that's a really good point. And being consistent is something that's really important. And we see that in everything. If we're going to be putting healthy boundaries in, no matter what the topic is, it's about that consistency so that the child then has a certain structure to thrive in. You know, the biggest problem we have sometimes is that the child will see this inconsistency and then be like, oh, well, I don't know if I'm coming or going or what's going on. And that really then disrupts the whole process of helping them to be independent. We had a great comment from Mariah saying, just here to say that my baby is 11 months and we co-sleep on a floor bed and love it. I'm starting to roll away and sleep on my own for a few hours each night, and the transition has been good so far. And that's fantastic, because it's really about, and you mentioned this before, Katie, about finding something that's going to work for you and your family. There's no one-stop shop. This is going to work for everybody. So I just wanted to mention that. And there are some more questions coming through. So we're going to take some of those now, and then we'll continue our conversation. So Nicole was saying, does sleeping on a floor bed promote children to stay up late and not get a good sleep? How do you ensure that they get enough sleep in the night?
So it doesn't really cause them to stay up later than any other bed would. I think the most important thing in ensuring your child gets enough sleep is putting them to bed on the earlier side when before they're overtired is a big one. And the second thing is to have a really steady routine with a lot of sleep cues so that they know that it's going to be the same every day. And also, when you are starting a new transition, a lot of parents, they'll say, oh, I've tried everything and nothing works. So they may have tried a lot of things, but often it's maybe for a day or two. And generally, for the first day or two, those are the hardest days. When there's a new big transition, especially for toddlers, the first few days are the hardest because they are learning something new. They're figuring it out. So they really need your support, and not in saying, oh, no, this isn't working, but yes, you got it. I know last night was hard, but we'll keep practicing. It'll be easier tonight. We can do this, really give them that support.
Yeah, absolutely. All about positive encouragement and reassurance. And I guess if you feel confident in the child, they're going to feel confident as well. So it's about giving them that sense of belief and self-esteem. And Susan was saying toddlers up and roaming around at night or not putting herself to sleep. Obviously, having those strong routines, as you mentioned, to really help the child go to sleep from the start, and having those high physical activities before, during the day, and making sure they have all that so they are ready for sleep is important. Must the parents put the child to sleep? Any opinions on that, Katie?
So I'm not super clear on the question. Is that
Yeah.
put them to sleep at bedtime or put them to sleep when they're up roaming around? I do think parents should be involved in bedtime. In terms of in the night, I would say this depends on family to family. You decide that boundary and stick with it. So if the boundary is the child needs to stay in their room, then if they go out of their room, you walk them back to their room. And generally, for my own children, I have a limit. The light stays off, they stay in their room. And my children were little. There were times when I say little, they're 2 and 4, but when they were littler, there were times when they would fall asleep with a basket of books everywhere, or they weren't quite ready to sleep. So they went and pulled all the clothes out of the dresser and then fell asleep over there. But that it passes because children inherently need their sleep and they biologically know how to sleep. We just kind of have to let them do it.
With support and guidance and boundaries. But yeah, it's only a period of time, so it will definitely pass. Gloria did mention about what kind of mattress or bed is recommended, the ones with a bed frame or rails or just a mattress. You did say 4 to 6 inches off the ground. Is that mattress to the ground, or is that with a frame? And by the way, just as on a side note, for everyone who sees those house type, the house frames and everyone thinks that those are Montessori floor beds, I just want to say that they're not. And you don't need one of these fancy house looking floor beds. So Katie, can you tell us a little bit about, the recommendations when it comes to whether it's just a mattress or a little frame or rails included, that kind of thing?
Mhm. Yeah, I would say about 6 inches max, including if you have something under the bed or not. And oh, another factor for if your child is under a year, you want an extra firm mattress. So a mattress that is sold as a baby mattress will automatically generally be extra firm. Or I found you can go to foam stores and get extra firm foam is a good choice. And then in terms of a bed frame, I never used a bed frame. I think economically, you don't really need to buy another thing that you're just going to use for a year, 6 months, 2 years. However, if you want a frame or if you're planning on your child staying in the floor bed their early years, there are some frames. I prefer the ones without rails. I think the rails that basically it's just a crib on the floor. So that kind of defeats the purpose unless that's what you're looking for. You don't need any rails. Also, when the babies are very little and figuring out their room in their bed and rolling off, it's kind of nice not to have a frame because then you don't have to worry about them bumping the frame.
Just a quick question on that note, Katie, with the size, sometimes they say that a crib mattress might not be like wide enough or enough room for the baby. Because I know that some people say they want to transition their child from a crib to a floor bed. They'll take the crib mattress out, but is that big enough, or do they actually need a little bit more room to kind of roll or move? And the other question is, I've seen some people put it up against a wall. Is that recommended or not?
Great questions. So, taking the crib and leaving the crib mattress is a great way to begin the transition. Although I'd also already have a bigger mattress in the so then the baby can still have that maybe the mattress they're used to, and then slowly they can transition to the bigger space. Generally, a twin or a full bed is what is recommended because they are able to kind of explore their motor development and they are able to get in and out and have more of a defined sleeping space as well. So they do sell crib mattresses that are a little bigger. I generally wouldn't choose that initially, but if that's what you have, that's a great start.
And what about putting it up against a wall?
Yeah, that's another concern some parents have that the baby may be wedged between the mattress and the wall. I would certainly observe and I would certainly have a rug underneath so that it doesn't slide around. I wouldn't say it's recommended to put it next to a wall, but it's generally not concerning. I put my baby's beds against the wall for parents who are concerned about the child getting wedged between the bed and the wall. Or if you observe and the bed does slide around, I'd scooch it more toward the middle of the room and leave maybe a foot and a half around the edges.
Right. And we had a question from Christopher earlier on about the leaving the lights on or night light so that if the child does wake up, they have enough light to play. Like this is during the night if they're waking up. Would you do that, or would you just encourage them or not have a night light on so that it just doesn't stimulate them? Because I've heard that in bedrooms and stuff, we should minimize the amount of toys and things that they can play with just in case they do wake up. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so again, that depends on the age and the stage of the baby. A 4 month old does not need any light. And you can absolutely have a play area on the other side of the room. They're not going to go over there in the middle of the night, or they might, but generally not to play or get toys. When the baby gets older, toward a year, they might find the toys to be a bit more distracting. I know that's kind of when I moved my daughter's play area from her room down to the living room because she would collect everything from the shelves and just put it in her bed. And so I did limit it to a few books and a few soft toys. So again, and that's also another big part of Montessori theory in practice is you observe and you see what your child is doing and if it's working for them, and if not, you adjust the environment.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so how does using a floor bed impact the sleep and independence for children? What have you seen on that note?
So I've definitely seen children sleep well both in a crib and a floor bed. I know when toddlers move from a crib to a floor bed, there can be a little bit of disruption in the beginning and sleep, but that does dissipate and it ends up being better as long as the parents are consistent. Another big question is, oh, what do I do if they get up? Or, whatever you decide to do, be consistent and they learn very quickly. Yeah, and they learn very quickly and they actually wake up less when you're consistent. If you are weaning at night or if you are moving the child to their own room, stick with it and the child actually starts to wake up less.
Right. And we spoke about this already, but maybe we should just explain it in a little bit more detail about how to set up the sleep environment with a floor bed. So, if you just kind of paint a picture of walking into a room, what would it look like?
Absolutely. So this again differs from age. I'd say maybe 3 to 12 months. I would choose a mattress on the floor if you want, like it's a small something underneath, that's fine. I would use a rug around the edge that sticks out maybe a couple feet around the edge of the mattress so that when they do roll, they're landing on something soft. And some people choose to put a play area, some people don't. Whatever you choose, I would avoid putting any hard furniture close to the bed. I know you often see these cute pictures of the bookshelf next to the bed and all these things, and it is very cute and probably more appropriate for a toddler, whereas you don't want them to hit the corner in the night. I think yeah, and my daughter's I think I actually duct taped a bunch of diapers around the corner of the furniture just because it was close to her bed, and then I was like, Just move the shelf." These little things that you don't necessarily think of. Yeah, make space around the bed. Another thing that is helpful is to have a really calm environment in terms of color and decoration. I'd keep it simple, and the sheets as well, lighter color or more, how do I say it? Like
Like
less
soft tones, not as
yeah,
busy.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I noticed I had a sheet for one of my children that had bright red and blue, like fire trucks and cars all over it. And I pulled it out and used it one day after using light plain sheets, and all they did was, like, stare at the trucks and the fire it was a bit distracting. So, yeah, the calm light colors generally create, less distraction.
Right. Okay. So another thing we had a question on was once you do decide to use a floor bed, and how would you introduce it to the child? So obviously when they're a baby, it's not much of an introduction and stuff because it's an easier transition, like you mentioned, at 3 to 4 months where they're moving from one thing to another. But a lot of people who do tend to use floor beds or transition do it at a later stage. So toddlers, or because they start climbing out of the crib and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't handle this. It's going to be dangerous. So at that stage, like how would you introduce it to the child? Is there a certain, think method that you used or something that you recommend to parents to do?
Yeah, so with toddlers, I love using images, like picture schedules or picture routines are very helpful. So, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, you kind of make a plan, write it down. So, in write it down, you write it down for yourself, but then you also make a simpler version for your child. And even if they can't read, they still know words. I would stick super closely to the routine. If they are already in their own room, I would introduce the bed before you ask them to sleep in it. So just put the bed in their room. Say, "Oh, this is your new bed. It's going to stay in your room." And they don't have to sleep in it. They can just stay in the crib. And that's the first step of the transition. And then if the crib has, a rail that comes off, or I know some of the travel cribs, you can unzip one of the walls. That would maybe be the next step and let them sleep, but keep the side open, and then eventually you take away the frame of the crib and just leave the crib mattress. And yeah, then take away the crib mattress. And they may choose to sleep on the floor for a period of time, and that's fine. But yeah, that's generally a good way if they're already in their own room. If they're moving from, say, your bed to a floor bed in another room, that yeah, definitely stick closely with the routine, and more gradually you could start sleeping with them in there and then gradually move back to your room. I do love a baby gate. Some people like them, some people don't. I find that especially you don't have that boundary of the crib, which is very limiting, but having a baby gate can help, I find can help diffuse power struggles because it's not the parent necessarily saying you have to stay in the room, you have to stay in the room. It's the parent saying, oh, nighttime, the gate stays closed. And if they come out and call for you, of course, you can go check on them depending on what your pre-decided boundary is. But it does help diffuse them running in and out or trying to fight you about staying in and
Yeah.
sleeping.
And especially if you fear safety, like I know a lot of people have stairs, like the bedrooms might be upstairs and they're worried about the child then moving out and then going down the stairs at night. So, of course, it's really about creating those safe and healthy boundaries within the environment so that your child can then have the freedom. Maria Montessori, like, always spoke about freedom within limits. So it's about creating that environment and allowing them the opportunity in a way that's safe for everybody, and they can have and exercise their independence. So we had a couple of questions that come in. Flora was saying when we were talking about the floor beds against a wall, she was asking if the top part of the floor bed shouldn't be next to the wall. Like, I'm assuming it's like the head of the bed. If you push it up, instead of it sitting just in the middle of a room, there should be like some part of it that's on a wall.
I guess that really depends on your comfort level and what you observe with your child. I think it would be fine to put a long side of the bed or the short side of the bed up against the wall and then observe and make sure it's working for your child.
Yeah, great. And so this was another question that we were going to get to. Gloria was asking, how can we ensure that the mattress is properly aired, especially when it's sitting directly on a rug or on the floor as opposed to sitting on a bed frame? And because we did have a lot of questions, and we always get these sorts of questions when it comes in, oh, what about mold under a floor bed? So what's your opinion on that?
I haven't seen this become an issue. I know it is a big concern for a lot of families. So you can always get a waterproof mattress cover. They have covers that are hypoallergenic that prevent dust from getting in the mattress. They also prevent moisture from getting in the mattress and they're washable. That's one option. Another option is putting like bed slats underneath. So instead of a bed frame, just put the slats to give it air, some sort of a mat that has air holes throughout. Yeah, or you can air out the bed regularly. You can leave it out when you change the sheets or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what Mariah was saying, just propping it up. Every time she changes sheets on a weekly basis, she'll just pop it up and give it some air or even turn it around as well. Gloria was asking, is it safe to put babies 3 months plus in a sleeveless sleep sack if they're rolling, or should they be dressed in a different way when they're in a floor bed? That's a great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. Yeah, absolutely. Sleep sacks are safe. That's the reason we use sleep sacks is because they're safer than blankets. They can't cover the child's head when they're sleeping. And you want to avoid a swaddle after about 3 months because babies do start rolling and you don't want them kind of stuck with their arms, not able to push up. So sleep sack is a great choice. And then as they get older, they may want to switch to a blanket or a sleep sack that has like foot holes. I know different families prefer different options.
Okay, great. Maxine was asking, do you recommend adding the floor bed directly into their room or first in the parents' room and then move the bed closer and closer to their room? I mean, we wouldn't want to have a bed in the corridor or the hallway, but would you where would you start with that? Would you start in the parents' room and just like on the floor next to the bed and then transition, or would you? And Maxine, could you just let us know how old that child is? Because it might give us a better indication. We'll just wait for that to come through the chat. 3 to 4 months. Okay.
Yeah, at 3 to 4 months, great to just transition them right to their room. They don't really need that longer transition because they haven't really developed any habits yet. They're not really capable of developing habits or an awareness until right around 3 or 4 months. So it's a great time to start with the routine and with having them in the environment that you plan to keep them in for a longer time.
And what if that, I'll just hypothetically say, what if that child was 2 years old or like 1.5, for example, and the child is used to sleeping in the parents' room in their bed? Would you recommend them doing the floor bed next to their bed, or, or I guess putting that boundary in and like having them in their own room? Or is that too much of a transition?
I think it depends on the kid, it depends on the family. Also, if there is a bed on the floor in the room, the child would probably just climb back in the big bed. Of course, it depends on the kid. It depends. I feel like it would be harder to keep that boundary with the bed in the parents' room.
Yep, I think I agree on that one. And then Gloria was following up on the earlier question about the floor bed setup. So how do we ensure the blankets are securely safe on a floor bed? So if your child is at that age where they are using a blanket or something like that, how would you make it safe on a floor bed?
Yeah, so until about 12 months, I would keep blankets away from the bed and just use a tight fitted sheet. And then once your child is around 12 months or more, you can maybe start with a small blanket, like a baby blanket, and it probably won't stay on the bed. They probably won't sleep under it. They'll sleep on top of it. And then the same when you transition to a comforter. It'll probably be a transition, but there's nothing inherently unsafe in giving a 2-year-old a comforter. And yeah, it probably won't stay on the bed at first.
Sure. And Katie, do you have any advice for, I guess, for educators or caregivers that want to let parents know about floor beds? Like, how would you approach that conversation? Or if they're doing independent sleeping within their setting, or is there any advice you would have on how to open those conversations with parents, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think there's always an in when a parent is asking about a challenge. Generally, if what they're doing is working for their family, then there's no reason to change it. But if they're asking, how can we create more freedom for our child? How can we create, more skills? This is one of the things you say, oh, well, I love choosing a floor bed because this and this and this. Or if it's, oh, my baby is sleeping in my bed and they're starting to wake up again and again, that would be another time to introduce it. So either a sleep challenge or a parent asking, like, how can I get more freedom for my child?
Great. We have a few questions that have come in around breastfeeding or babies that are feeding during the night. So Flora was asking about a 2-year-old that still breastfeeds. Do we need to wait for them to sleep, then we transfer to the floor bed, or do we co-sleep in their floor bed?
So generally, if you're still nursing to sleep, you put them to sleep in their bed. And then as they fall asleep, you just kind of roll away. I did that with my daughter and my son when they were little. And yeah, it works well. After about 4 months, if babies wake up in an environment that's different than the one where they fell asleep, they actually tend to wake up more often and they get a little more disoriented and they have a harder time going back to sleep on their own. Yeah, put them to sleep in their own bed.
Yeah, definitely. And on that point about feeling secure and safe in their environment, like babies will wake up more often because they didn't have that sense of security from the beginning because the environment was different, right? It was this kind of different. So keeping that consistent where they sleep, where they fell asleep and staying there is really important. Gloria had the same question about babies who frequently nurse at night. So especially the parent needs to balance sleep and going back to work and nursing through the night and stuff. It can be quite challenging. So, what would your opinion be on creating an environment that's supporting the child, but also for the parents, like supporting them through the night too?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So biologically, developmentally, babies don't need to eat during the night after about 4 to 6 months. So one option would be to night wean or to limit how often you're feeding them at night. I know a lot of parents like nursing at night for longer, or a lot of parents just want to ease out of that more gradually, which is of course up to the individual family whether you want to night wean all at once or more gradually or wait until the child is older. That's really up to you. However, if the child is used to eating at night, they do tend to wake up more often during the night. So again, you kind of have to figure out what your priorities are and what works for your family.
I think it is a very individualized approach, and you've just got to really understand and observe your child and see what's going to work for you and your family. That includes yourselves as well. We're going to pop Katie's links and things all into the chat for everybody to then reach out to her and find her if they'd like to connect with her after the event. Now, I did want to ask, is there any last advice for parents or caregivers that want to implement a floor bed? Like, is there any parting words that you wanted to share with everybody? And if anyone has any last questions, we've still got a good 5 minutes if anyone has anything else they wanted to ask. But tell us, Katie, is there anything else that we haven't spoken about that you really wanted to share with everybody?
I think we've touched on it a little bit, but really trust your child and trust yourself as a parent and your parenting decisions. And children really are quite capable when you give them a chance. And I think that's a big thing that we have to keep reminding ourselves. And I know it's hard in the middle of the night when you're tired, but yeah, trust your child. They can do it. You can do it. Um, Another thing that I did not mention is the language you use around introducing a big change, whether it's sleeping in their own room or weaning an older toddler or moving to a floor bed. I would really make a point of using neutral language and not saying, oh, don't you want to be in a big kid bed? Or, oh, only babies do this. And so I really emphasize just make the decision, say, this is what's happening. And are there things you can even ask them? Are there things that could make this easier for you? Do you have any ideas? What part of the routine should we add? Two stuffed animals to the bed or four? Or give them choices, but don't try to convince them and don't use judgmental language because that tends to make things harder for the children and makes the transition take longer.
I think it's really important, like you mentioned, in terms of the language that we use. We often underestimate that the way we communicate with children about these transitions is really important. And I think you really touched on that, where you make it more of a positive experience and not really shaming them for, oh, why aren't you staying in your bed? And, da da da, like having all that, but offering them choice and allowing them to be autonomous in that, and joining in on the transition is really important, because it is a big change, especially if they're probably like 14 months up until 2.5, or even 4 year olds that are still, co-sleeping and transitioning. So that was a really, really great point. Thank you so much for taking your time, for coming today and joining Katie and I and the Childhood Potential and Montessori Parenting and Guide and Grow. Katie, any last words for our audience or anyone before you go?
Thank you for joining. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really glad that so many people are interested in learning more about floor beds and Montessori and supporting their children. Thank you.
Yep, no worries. Thank you so much, everyone, and for joining us once again. It's been such a pleasure. We look forward to seeing you all at the next event. Bye, everyone.